There's a pattern in history that has destroyed every global superpower of the last 500 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States is following that same pattern, stage by stage, decision by decision, almost as if we're reading from the exact same script that led catastrophe every time before. This is not a prediction about what might happen. This is a historical autopsy of what has already happened to the greatest empires the world has ever known. In 1590, Spain was the richest empire on earth. They controlled half the world's gold and silver. Their military dominated Europe. Their currency was accepted everywhere. Yet within 80 years, Spain was bankrupt, a second-rate power that never recovered. In 1914, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history. The sun never set on British territory. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Within 40 years, the empire was gone. The currency collapsed. Britain became America's junior partner. In 1991, the Soviet Union was one of two global superpowers: nuclear weapons, worldwide influence, satellites orbiting the planet. It ceased to exist in 900 days, not from invasion, not from war, but from economic implosion. 3 empires, 3 superpowers, 3 total collapses, all following the exact same sequence. And here's the part that should terrify you. The United States has already completed 5 of the 7 stages. We are not approaching the pattern. We are deep inside it. This is a story of how empires die, why they always believe they're different, and why the math says we are next. And it is happening faster than anyone wants to admit. Before we walk to the stages we are in right now, you need to understand what imperial collapse actually looks like in the real world. Because empires do not die the way people imagine. Collapse does not begin with invasion. It does not begin with tanks rolling through capitals. It does not begin with defeat on the battlefield. It begins with economic exhaustion. The empire stretches beyond its ability to sustain itself. Military bases in 150 countries. Wars on multiple fronts. Promises it cannot keep. Debt it can never repay. At first, the decline is invisible. The currency still works. The military still wins battles. The government still makes promises. But beneath the surface, the foundation is cracking. Resources are misallocated. Productive capacity shrinks. The best and brightest leave. Then comes the acceleration. Allies begin hedging. Enemies start testing boundaries. Trade partners seek alternatives. Reserve currency status begins to erode. Suddenly, the very advantages that created power become vulnerabilities. The currency that once flowed outward floods back home. The global military footprint becomes unsustainable. Promises once backed by strength become empty words. This is not theory. This is exactly what happened to Spain. Exactly what happened to Britain. Exactly what happened to the Soviet Union. And it happened for the same reasons. They believed their power was permanent. They overextended militarily. They debased their currency. And they refused to accept reality until collapse was unavoidable. So let's look at how it actually happened. Starting with the first global empire, Spain, because Spain wrote the original blueprint. After Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, Spain became the first true world superpower. They conquered the Aztec and Inca empires. They seized control of the richest gold and silver mines ever discovered, and that wealth would destroy them. By 1550, Spanish galleons were hauling home 200 tons of silver every year. By 1600, that number had doubled to over 400 tons annually. Spain didn't just have wealth. Spain controlled the money supply of Europe. The Spanish real became the global reserve currency. Everyone wanted Spanish silver. And this is where the pattern always begins. A nation that controls the world's money starts to believe it is invincible. King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, had access to more wealth than any monarch in human history. And he spent it the way empires always do. On power, on prestige, on war. This brings us to stage 1, military overextension. Spain fought everywhere, all at once, against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, against France and Italian states in Europe, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England's navy in the Atlantic, alongside wars in the Philippines and throughout the Americas. By 1580, Spain had military commitments on 4 continents. The cost was staggering. More than half of Spain's total revenue went to the military, and it still wasn't enough, which forced them into Stage 2, currency debasement. Taxes couldn't cover the bills, so Spain did what every failing empire eventually does. They debased the currency. Silver coins were quietly mixed with copper, then more copper, then even more. A coin that was once pure silver became 50% copper, then 75%. The face value stayed the same. The real value collapsed. By 1600, Spanish coins contained barely any silver at all. Merchants stopped accepting them at face value. Prices surged. Inflation exploded. And this led directly to Stage 3, the debt spiral. Spain borrowed relentlessly from Italian bankers, from German financiers, from anyone willing to lend. By 1557, less than 20 years into Philip's reign, Spain declared bankruptcy. Then again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596, for sovereign bankruptcies in 40 years. Each time, they promised reform. Each time, they returned to borrowing and spending. And this brings us to Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. This is the part most people miss. Spain didn't collapse despite its gold and silver. Spain collapsed because of it. When money is easy, production stops. Why grow food when you can import it? Why build ships when you can buy them? Why innovate when you can spend? Work became socially unacceptable among Spanish nobility. Manufacturing declined. Agriculture stagnated. Spain stopped making things. The silver arriving from the Americas flowed straight back out to French wine, Italian silk, Dutch manufactured goods. Spain became a conduit, not a creator. Wealth passed through the country, but none of it stayed. By 1600, Spain produced almost nothing of value. It was entirely dependent on imports, entirely dependent on silver. So when the mines began to decline, when production slowed, the entire system collapsed, which triggered Stage 5, social decay. Crime surged. Beggars filled the streets of Madrid. Public order deteriorated. The most productive citizens left. Engineers, merchants, craftsmen, and thinkers emigrated to France, England, and the Netherlands, countries that were building, innovating, and growing. Spain was left behind, a nation full of bureaucrats, soldiers, and priests, with too many consumers and almost no producers. The empire still existed on paper, but economically it was already dead. By 1640, Spain lost Portugal. By 1650, they lost the Netherlands, their richest and most productive territory. And by 1700, the Spanish Empire was finished. Still large on maps, still impressive on paper, but economically dead. Spain fell from world superpower to secondary power in less than a century, and it never recovered. Spain today still exists. It is pleasant, cultured, historic, but it is irrelevant on the global stage. A tourist destination built on the ruins of empire, a vacation spot for the descendants of the conquistadors. That is what imperial collapse actually looks like. Now let's fast forward 300 years to the next empire that thought it was different. Britain. At its peak, the British Empire was the largest in human history. It controlled 25% of the world's land surface, ruled over 400 million people. The sun literally never set on British territory. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. International contracts were denominated in pounds. Central banks held British bonds. London was the financial center of the world. And just like Spain before it, Britain believed this status was permanent. It wasn't. They had already entered the pattern. Stage 1, military overextension. By 1900, Britain had military commitments everywhere. India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific, the Caribbean, 6 continents. Defending an empire that stretched across the globe required enormous resources, and the costs were rising faster than the economy could support. Then came World War I. In 1914, Britain faced a choice: stay neutral and preserve the empire's finances, or fight and bankrupt itself to win. They chose to fight. World War I cost Britain over $40 billion, roughly $1 trillion in today's dollars. They didn't pay for it with savings. They borrowed, primarily from the United States. By 1918, Britain had won the war, but lost its financial dominance. The world's greatest creditor nation had become a debtor. Stage 2, currency debasement. Before the war, the pound was backed by gold, but war drains gold. Britain shipped massive amounts of gold to America to pay for weapons, food, and supplies. By 1920, Britain's gold reserves were half what they had been in 1914. Yet instead of adjusting to reality, Britain chose denial. In 1925, they returned to the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate, pretending nothing had changed. It was a disaster. The pound was now massively overvalued. British exports became too expensive. Factories shut down. Manufacturing collapsed. Unemployment surged. To defend the currency, the government kept interest rates painfully high, crushing the domestic economy. By 1931, reality won. Britain abandoned the gold standard. The pound immediately lost 25% of its value. The world's reserve currency had just admitted it could not keep its promises. Stage 3, the debt spiral. Britain never recovered from World War I debt, and then history repeated itself. World War II erupted. This time, the cost was even higher, over $120 billion, again financed through borrowing, again mostly from the United States. By 1945, Britain owed the U.S. and Canada more than $30 billion, more than the country's entire GDP. They won the war, but the empire was finished. They couldn't afford to defend it. They couldn't afford to administer it. They couldn't afford to keep it. Stage 4, loss of empire. In 1947, Britain surrendered India, the crown jewel, the economic engine of the empire. Gone. Over the next 2 decades, the rest followed: Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean. By 1970, the British Empire existed only in textbooks and nostalgia. Stage 5, currency collapse. What followed was humiliation disguised as management. Inflation surged. Growth stagnated. Strikes paralyzed the country. By 1976, Britain had run out of money. The former ruler of a quarter of the world had to beg the IMF for a bailout, and the IMF agreed on one condition: Britain would surrender control of its own budget. Public spending was slashed. Social programs were cut. Economic policy was dictated by foreign creditors. That is the final stage of imperial collapse. Not invasion, not conquest, but dependency. Britain still exists today. London is still important. The country is still prosperous by global standards, but the exorbitant privilege is gone. The pound is no longer king. Britain no longer sets the rules. It lives within limits imposed by reality. That is what happens when an empire outlives its economic foundation. The pound kept falling. In 1940, £1 bought about $4. By 1950, it was $2.80. By 1970, $2.40. By 1980, $2.30. And today, £1 buys roughly $1.27. The world's reserve currency became a regional currency. Britain tried to maintain the illusion: a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nuclear weapons, a so-called special relationship with the United States. But everyone understood the truth. Britain was no longer a great power. It had become a museum of former greatness, a nation living on prestige accumulated generations earlier. The empire was gone, and it never came back. Now let's look at the most recent example: the Soviet Union. From 1945 to 1991, the USSR emerged from World War II as a superpower. It had nuclear weapons, total military dominance over Eastern Europe, satellites in space. Soviet leaders believed history was on their side, that communism would bury capitalism, that the Soviet model was the future of humanity. For 45 years, they competed with the United States. They matched America missile for missile, tank for tank, troop for troop. But beneath the surface, the economy was already dying. Stage 1, military overextension. The Soviet Union spent 15 to 20% of its GDP on the military, roughly 3 times what the United States spent. They tried to match American technology, American reach, and American alliances, but their economy was a fraction of size. They occupied Afghanistan, propped up Cuba, supported Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, and Ethiopia. Everywhere America had influence, the Soviets felt compelled to counter. The cost was crushing. Stage 2, economic stagnation. By the 1970s, the Soviet economy stopped growing. Oil revenue kept the system alive, but nothing else worked. Factories produced junk. Farms failed. Technology lagged decades behind the West. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was importing grain. A country with some of the best farmland on Earth couldn't feed itself. Why? Because central planning doesn't work. Innovation dies under control. And people don't produce when there's no incentive. Stage 3, currency failure. The ruble was never a real currency. It couldn't be exchanged internationally. Foreigners didn't want it. Even Soviet citizens didn't trust it. When they could, they used U.S. dollars. To buy foreign goods, the Soviet government had to pay in gold and oil because no one accepted rubles. Then oil prices collapsed in the mid-1980s. Gold reserves drained. Hard currency disappeared. The Soviet Union was running out of real money. Stage 4, loss of empire. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and Eastern Europe walked away. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, gone in less than a year. The Soviet satellites that provided strategic depth vanished overnight. Moscow couldn't stop it. They were broke. Stage 5, total collapse. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, just 900 days from the fall of the Berlin Wall, to complete dissolution. No invasion, no foreign conquest, just economic implosion. The military couldn't be paid. The government couldn't function. The ruble became worthless. A superpower with 30,000 nuclear weapons collapsed from internal economic failure. The pattern repeated. Overextension, currency failure, debt, loss of empire, collapse. And here is what should keep you awake at night. The United States is following the same pattern, stage by stage. Let's start with stage 1, military overextension. The United States maintains over 750 military bases in 80 countries. American troops operate in roughly 150 countries. We are committed to defending Europe through NATO, defending Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, fighting in the Middle East, countering China, countering Russia, everywhere, all at once. And history tells us exactly how this ends, unless something changes. Our military budget is now $850 billion a year, more than the next 10 countries combined. And it's still not enough. We're stretched thin. Equipment is aging. Recruitment is collapsing. Readiness is falling. And the commitments keep growing. If China invades Taiwan, if Russia pushes into NATO territory, and if Iran closes the Persian Gulf, the United States cannot respond to all 3 at once. That's not opinion. That's math. This is military overextension. The same mistake made by Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Stage 1, check. Stage 2, currency debasement. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar became a pure fiat currency. Since 2000, the U.S. money supply has increased over 400%. Since 2020, more than $6 trillion has been created out of nothing. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. We aren't clipping silver coins like Spain did. We're doing something more sophisticated and more dangerous. We're printing unlimited paper. Different mechanism. Same result. Debasement. Check. Stage 3, debt spiral. The United States now owes $36 trillion, about 120% of GDP. Interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. For the first time in modern history, we spend more on interest than on defense. We run massive deficits every single year. In 2024, during peace and economic growth, the deficit was $1.8 trillion. We borrow to pay interest on previous borrowing. That is a literal definition of a debt spiral. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed until it collapsed. The Soviet Union ran out of money. We are not special. Debt spiral. Check. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. America doesn't make things anymore. We design. We finance. We consume. But we don't produce. Manufacturing was hollowed out and shipped to China, Mexico, and Vietnam. We import roughly $800 billion more than we export every year. We depend on foreign supply chains for medicine, electronics, steel, rare earths, even military components. Just like Spain imported everything while silver flowed out, America imports everything while dollars flow out. And just like Spain, when the money stops flowing, the system collapses. Loss of production? Check. Stage 5, social decay. Trust in institutions is at historic lows. Crime is rising. Homelessness is exploding. Drug overdoses kill 100,000 Americans a year. The best and brightest are leaving or checking out. Fertility rates are collapsing. Political dysfunction is total. We can't agree. We can't build. We can't reform. The signs are everywhere. But everyone pretends it's fine. It's not fine. Social decay. Check. We are now on stage 5 of 7. The Soviet Union reached stage 5 shortly before total collapse. Britain and Spain lasted longer, but the pattern was the same. We are not at the end yet, but we are deep into the sequence. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is the tipping point. It happens when allies start diversifying, trade shifts to other currencies, and the dollar floods back home because no one needs to hold it anymore. We are already seeing early signs. BRICS nations building alternatives. Central banks buying gold at record levels. China and Russia trading in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil. The cracks are forming. Stage 7, collapse, not slow decline. Sudden implosion. The Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent in 900 days. Britain lost its empire in 20 years. Spain took longer, but the outcome was the same. When the reserve currency fails, when the debt becomes unpayable, and when the military can't be funded, collapse is fast, brutal, and unforgiving. And everyone who believed it can't happen here learns the same lesson every empire learns. It can, and it does. 3 empires followed this pattern. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union. Each believed they were exceptional. Each believed the rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong.